The cold by his steel cuffs locked around my wrists, and the echo of them tightening seemed louder than the lobby itself. I could hear the shuffle of police boots against the polished marble, and the murmur of neighbors pretending not to stare, but staring anyway. The overhead chandelier cast a glow that felt less like light and more like judgment, and I stood there humiliated in the very place I paid to live. My voice cracked when I tried to protest. I live here, this is my building. But the officers glanced at each other like they had already made up their minds, and one of them muttered something about a disturbance. My pulse hammered against the cuffs, and I tasted bitterness rising in my throat. Somewhere behind the cluster of uniforms, I caught sight of her arms, folded eyes, gleaming lips curled with satisfaction. Kerren. She had that look of someone who had not only won a battle, but was already savoring the applause. I could almost hear her rehearsed version of the story, ready to spread to the halls. Before I could even post bail, the queen of the homeowners association, standing smug in her kingdom, while I, the so-called intruder, was being marched out of my own lobby. The humiliation burned deeper with every step toward the glass doors. Flashes of phone cameras caught pieces of me, the arrested neighbor, the troublemaker, the man who did not belong. It was surreal, almost cinematic, except it was my life playing out like a twisted script. I wanted to scream, but what would that prove? It would only feed her narrative. Hours earlier the evening had been ordinary. I had come home with groceries, exhausted from a long day. My arms ached from the weight of the bags, and all I wanted was a collapse on the couch. I remember the smell of warm bread escaping from one of the paper bags, and thinking about how good it would taste with butter and tea. That thought never reached reality. Kerren intercepted me in the lobby like a hawk spotting prey. She stood in front of the elevator, blocking my way, her blonde bob perfectly in place, her expression hard as stone. She tilted her head like I was some puzzle she did not like, and asked sharply, "Can I help you?" Her tone was not kindness, it was suspicion. I balanced the groceries and said calmly, "No, thanks, just heading up." She narrowed her eyes. "You mean visiting someone? Because residents are not allowed to linger down here." I blinked, certain she must be joking. I've lived here for months. I said my unit is on the 12th floor. She gave a dry laugh. "Oh, really? I know every resident in this building, and I have never seen you before. Do you even have a key?" Her words scraped across my patience. I pulled out the key fob from my pocket and held it up, but she waved it off like it proved nothing. She glanced at the grocery bags and at me, and her voice sharpened again. "This lobby is not for loitering. If you do not leave, I will call security." It was ridiculous. My frustration simmered, but I tried reason. "Listen, I am a paying resident. I have mail with my name and address. I can show you right now." She smirked, almost enjoying the exchange, and said anyone can fake an envelope. In that moment, I saw what she really wanted. It was not about the rules, it was about control. She relished the power of telling someone where they could or could not stand. She wanted submission, not truth. I clenched my jaw, swallowed the anger, and turned to walk away toward the elevator. That should have been the end. But it never ended with Kerren. She followed her threats with action. She dialed security. While I was still waiting for the elevator doors to slide open, I heard her voice, sharp and theatrical, telling them there was a suspicious man loitering in the lobby. He refused to identify himself. He looked aggressive. She was painting a villain, and she chose me for the role. Security arrived minutes later. They knew me by sight. But Kerren spoke faster, louder, twisting their hesitation into obedience. The officers arrived soon after, Kerren waving her hands, directing them toward me like I was a wild animal she had cornered. And now here I was, wrist-cuffed neighbors watching, reputation shattered. The ride to the station was a blur. The car smelled faintly of disinfectant, and leather the radio crackled with static. My thoughts replayed every word, every smug glance, every smirk of hers. I was too stunned to even feel rage. Fully, it was humiliation, heavy, thick, and suffocating. By the time I was process booked and released hours later, the sky outside had shifted from night to the pale gray of dawn. My shoulders sagged from exhaustion, but beneath the fatigue a spark of something else flickered. Rage, yes, but also resolve. I replayed the look on her face when the cuffs clicked around my wrist, that self-satisfied gleam. That was the moment I promised myself this would not be the end. She thought she had crushed me. She thought she had won. But she had only woken something I did not know was still in me. When I stepped back into the lobby later that day, the marble floor shone, the chandelier glittered, and the air smelled faintly of polish. But the memory of last night lingered like smoke. Kerren was not there, but her presence was in every whisper, every glance from neighbors who quickly looked away. I knew she was upstairs, plotting her next move, certain she had cemented her power, certain I would stay quiet. But she was wrong. The cuffs had hurt, yes, the humiliation had cut deep, yes, but the story was not over. I was still standing, and I was not done. The days after the arrest blurred together, but the sting never dulled. Every time I stepped into the lobby, I felt eyes on me, whispers brushing past my ears, as if my neighbors were measuring me against the story Kerren had already fed them. She had turned a single night into a legend, painting me as the unruly tenant, the outsider, who caused chaos in her pristine building. Kerren did not stop with whispers. She launched a campaign as deliberate as a chess game. A warning slip arrived at my door, accusing me of noise violations at midnight. Though I had been asleep, another notice claimed I had left trash in the hallway, which I never had. Each paper was signed with the cold insignia of the Homeowners Association, and I knew whose hand guided them. At first, I tried to reason. The next HOA meeting arrived, and I attended, determined to clear my name. The room smelled faintly of stale coffee, and cheap carpet cleaner residents sat in rows, while Kerren perched at the head of the table, like a judge waiting to hand down a sentence. When I raised my hand to speak, she gave a tight smile that never reached her eyes. I explained calmly the accusations were false. I asked for evidence. I reminded them I had lived here peacefully for months. But Kerren cut me off with a laugh sharp enough to slice the air. Evidence. She said with mockery, "We have testimony, and that is enough." She gestured toward a couple in the corner, who nodded along more out of fear than conviction. I could see in their eyes they did not believe me, but they did not dare cross her. Her control was absolute. Her voice filled the room. Her authority drowned out mine. When I tried to press further, she leaned forward and whispered just loud enough for the crowd to hear, "Maybe if you spent more time respecting the rules and less time arguing, you would fit in here." Laughter rippled through the room. My cheeks burned, my fists clenched under the table. But I swallowed the anger, because shouting would make her right in their eyes. She dismissed me with a wave and moved on to the next agenda item, leaving me sitting there stripped of dignity. After the meeting, neighbors avoided me in the halls. They offered polite nods without words, as though speaking to me might put them in her crosshairs. Kerren, meanwhile, thrived on the distance she had created. Every day her smug presence loomed. She would pass me in the lobby and say things like, "Remember the rules, neighbor," or "Give it time. Maybe you will learn how we do things here." Her harassment was not about rules. It was about dominance. She enjoyed the power of making me feel like a guest in my own home. I tried to ignore her, but the weight grew heavier each day until the night she struck again. I had returned late from work, carrying a briefcase, and fatigue etched deep into my bones. The lobby was quiet, the hum of the air conditioning the only sound, until her heels clicked against the tile. She stepped out from the shadows of column arms, folded, her expression rehearsed. She called out loudly enough to echo, "He is back again. Security told me he has been sneaking around." Before I could even respond, she had her phone in hand, dialing the police. Her words spilled into the receiver, urgent, dramatic. "He is here again. He will not leave. He is harassing me." The déjà vu was suffocating. Minutes later, red and blue lights painted the windows. The same officers from before entered, and Kerren pointed directly at me with triumph etched across her face. "He does not live here," she announced it, as though it were fact carved in stone. The humiliation returned sharp and merciless, but this time something inside me shifted. The officers hesitated. One even glanced at me with doubt, as if realizing her story had cracks. My anger flared, not wild, but cold, precise. I spoke with steady voice. "Check the lease. My name is on it. Check the security footage. I walk in with fob every day. Check the mailboxes. I have deliveries with my name on them." Kerren sputtered over my words, trying to drown me out with volume. But the seed of doubt had been planted. Still, the officers led me aside, asked questions, prodded for identification. And though I avoided the cuffs this time, the damage was done. Kerren smirked, as though victory was hers again. That night, alone in my apartment, I sat in the dim light, staring at the blank wall. Rage pulsed through me. But beneath it was clarity. Confrontation alone would not win. Logic would not win. Yelling would not win. She had built her power on intimidation and noise. If I wanted to defeat her, I needed to be quieter, sharper, and far more dangerous. Her downfall would not come from a shouting match. It would come from exposing what she truly was: a parasite feeding on control, a hypocrite wrapped in rules, a tyrant hiding behind a mask of order. The plan began to form slowly. My humiliation had been public. Her fall would be even more. So she thought she had ended my spirit. But in truth, she had only given me reason to fight, a reason far greater than dignity, a reason rooted in justice. As I lay down that night, exhaustion dragging me into uneasy sleep, I whispered to myself, "She thinks she has won. She has no idea what is coming." The next morning I woke with determination sharp, and the sting of the handcuffs had ever been. The humiliation was still raw, but it had hardened into purpose. I knew Kerren relied on intimidation and volume. But bullies always carried a weakness. My task was to find hers. I began quietly. The security guard on the night shift was a young man named Luis. He had seen me enter countless times, fob in hand, nodding politely as I passed. When I approached him, he hesitated, but then leaned closer, his voice low. She pushes everyone around, man. Nobody wants to get on her bad side. But you're not the problem, she is. I asked if the building kept footage of fob entries. He nodded, and for the first time I felt the ground shift beneath me. That night, I sat at my desk, scrolling through security reports. I found my own name and apartment number logged hundreds of times, every late night return, every early morning exit, each one time-stamped undeniable proof that I lived there. I printed the documents, the ink still warm between my fingers. The evidence was beginning to pile up. But proof of residence would not be enough. Kerren thrived on bending perception. She could twist even the clearest fact. If given a stage, what I needed was more than truth. I needed her mask to crack. I started paying attention to her patterns. She attended every HOA meeting, every social gathering in the lobby, her voice carrying across the room, her words dripped with judgment. But I noticed something beneath the surface. She was careful, too careful. Whenever finances came up, she would redirect conversations. When someone asked where HOA fees were being spent, she laughed off questions about renovations that never happened. My instincts told me there was rot beneath her polished exterior. I began digging. The HOA budget was technically public, though rarely requested. I filed for copies, and the treasurer reluctantly handed them over. The numbers did not add up. There were charges for maintenance that had never been done, payments to companies that seemed not to exist. My pulse quickened. Kerren was not just a tyrant drunk on power, she was a thief. Still, I could not strike, yet she was too cunning, too skilled at twisting the narrative. I needed more. The chance arrived sooner than I expected. One evening, I stepped into the lobby to find her berating an elderly neighbor, a quiet man, who had once waved kindly to me. She accused him of propping the door open, a violation. She declared a threat to the entire building. The man trembled, trying to explain that he was only waiting for his daughter to help him carry groceries. Kerren raised her voice enough to echo, accusing him of endangering everyone. My phone was already in my hand. The red record button glowed as I captured every word, every sneer, every condescending remark. She was so focused on humiliating him that she never noticed me standing behind the column. The video ended with her shouting, "If you cannot follow rules, maybe you should not live here." The next morning, the video was posted in the resident group chat. I attached no comment, just a raw footage. Within minutes, replies flooded in shocked emojis, questions, whispers of finally someone caught it. The clip spread like wildfire. Neighbors who had once turned away from me now reached out privately. Some sent their own stories of how she had bullied them. Notes slipped under my door, handwritten words, "Thank you for standing up." Kerren responded with fury, storming into the hallways, accusing me of slander, threatening lawsuits. But the more she shouted, the more desperate she appeared. The mask was cracking. I compiled everything, the security logs proving my residence, the financial inconsistencies, hinting at fraud, the testimonies of neighbors who had been silenced by fear, and most importantly, the video evidence of her cruelty. Each piece was a nail in the coffin. The building buzzed with anticipation. The next HOA meeting was scheduled for the end of the month. Kerren believed it would be another stage for her authority. She strutted through the halls, chin high, speaking loudly about new rules she would impose. My neighbors listened with narrowed eyes. Some still feared her, but others had begun to exchange glances behind her back. The tide was turning. I spent nights preparing my words, practicing not to shout, not to rage, but to strike clean and precise. My heart burned with the memory of the cuffs, the sting of public humiliation, the taste of helplessness. I imagined her face when the truth unfolded, not just before me, but before the entire community she claimed to represent. The day of the meeting arrived. I stood in my apartment, adjusting my tie, feeling the weight of everything on my shoulders. Outside my window, the city glowed with the fading light of dusk. Inside, the air felt electric charged with the sense that justice was close. Kerren had played her game with arrogance and noise. Now it was my turn to move, and I would do it with silence, precision, and undeniable truth. She thought the meeting would end with my final humiliation, but it would be her downfall that echoed through the marble halls. The meeting room buzzed with a low hum of conversation. Residents gathered in tighter clusters than usual, their voices sharp with anticipation. Chairs scraped against the floor, and the smell of coffee and paper mixed in the air. Kerren entered last, striding with the confidence of someone certain of victory. Her heels clicked against the tile, her chin lifted high, her lips curled in a smile that was more weapon than gesture. She took her seat at the head of the table and tapped her papers together as if she had already silenced the room. Her eyes found me across the rows, and her smile sharpened. "I hope you have come prepared," she said sweetly, though her tone carried venom. I replied, evenly I am. She laughed and waved a hand, dismissing me. Before I even spoke, the meeting began with her usual rhythm, her voice commanding, as she rattled off rules, infractions, gossip disguised. As ordered, some residents nodded, but others shifted uneasily. Their patience was thinning, and she could not see it. When the floor opened for comments, I stood, my heart pounded, but my voice emerged steady. Kerren rolled her eyes and muttered, "Here we go again." I ignored her. I began with proof, simple, undeniable proof: security logs, showing my key fob, entering Daily Mail, addressed to me deliveries, stamped with my name, the document spread across the table, and a murmur rippled through the room. Kerren tried to cut in, saying those could be fabricated, but the treasurer leaned forward, eyes widening. He confirmed the logs. "We're official." The room stilled. Kerren flushed and snapped, "Well, that proves nothing about your behavior." I held her gaze and said, "Then let us discuss behavior." I played the video of her berating the elderly neighbor. Her voice filled the room, dripping with cruelty. The residents shifted, gas erupted, and the elderly man himself stood quietly in the back, his head bowed in memory. Kerren lunged for the table, shouting, "That is taken out of context," but the evidence was raw, unedited, undeniable. Neighbors began whispering louder, some shaking their heads, some glaring at her. For the first time, Kerren's confidence wavered. But I did not stop. I laid out the budget documents, line by line, the missing funds of Phantom companies, the invoices that led nowhere. My voice grew sharper, more precise, each sentence cutting away at the facade she had built. The treasurer leaned forward, his hands trembling as he recognized names of accounts he had signed. Without question. Kerren's face twisted red. She stood and slammed her palms against the table, shouting, "Lies, slander. This is all orchestrated by him. Because he cannot follow the rules." Her voice cracked shrill, too shrill. The room was no longer hers. The residents were no longer hers. Their eyes no longer held fear. They held fury. One resident shouted, "What about the roof repairs we paid for?" Another added, "Where did the landscaping money go?" A chorus rose, questions piling, accusations building into a storm. Kerren's mouth opened and closed, her words tripping over each other. The mask was gone. The tyrant stood exposed. I delivered the final blow calmly, my voice steady, unlike hers. I said, "You had me arrested in my own lobby. You humiliated me in front of my neighbors. You spread lies and you twisted rules. But what you cannot twist is truth, and the truth is you are unfit to lead." The room erupted. Neighbors who had once bowed their heads now stood tall, demanding answers. The treasurer called for a vote. A motion was raised to remove Kerren from the board. The tally was swift, unanimous. Her reign ended not with applause, but with the crushing silence of rejection. Kerren shouted, still clawing for power, threatening lawsuit, swearing revenge. But her words bounced off walls that no longer belonged to her. The final strike came when one resident called the police, this time for her. They arrived within minutes, their uniforms reflecting the fluorescent lights. Kerren's protests grew frantic, wild. As the officers questioned her about the finances, when they asked her to step outside, she screamed, "I am the victim. I am the one protecting this building," but nobody believed her anymore. The sight was poetic. She was led out through the very lobby where she once stood, watching me in cuffs. The residents filmed with their phones, their eyes wide with satisfaction. Some even smirked openly as the Queen of Rules was escorted into the night. The silence that followed was heavy, then broke into applause, not for me, but for the justice that had finally arrived. I sank into a chair, my chest heaving the weight of months. Lifting off me, neighbors came forward, shaking my hand, offering apologies, words of gratitude. It was not victory alone, it was vindication. Days later, the building felt lighter. The whispers were gone, replaced with greetings and nods of respect. The elderly neighbor left cookies at my door. Luis the guard gave me a small salute. Each evening the HOA voted a new leadership, transparent and calm. The air itself seemed clearer. One morning I passed through the lobby and noticed a for sale sign posted outside Kerren's unit. The sight made me pause, a quiet smile tugging at my lips. As I crossed the polished floor, I glanced up at the chandelier that once seemed to burn with judgment. Now it simply glowed with light. I whispered to myself, "Guess the lobby feels a lot quieter," without her voice echoing through it, and for the first time since moving in I felt home.